This is episode number 43 of the Silver Track Extra.
Thanks for tuning in to the Silver Track Extra, your source for the best tips, tricks, and how-tos to dominate the security industry, helping you improve your business, win more contracts, and crush your competition. Here are your hosts, Chris Anderson and Johnny Page.
What's up, Silver Track Nation? Johnny Page here along with Chris Anderson on episode number 43 of the Silver Track Extra. Today, we are in part 2 of our series on the ultimate guide to running your security dispatch center, where we're going to talk about the pros and cons of outsourcing. So, Chris, this is something that you'll have a lot to add on, a subject that is particularly close to your heart, as this was something that you've experienced when you were running your security company. So what were some of the reasons that you eventually decided to outsource your call center?
Well, number one was cost. I had a 24-hour dispatch center because we were providing parking management and we were providing security management for a lot of the residential communities in Orange County. And we had calls coming in, and I had to have, bilingual dispatchers at the same time. We had to take calls during the day for registration permit orders, and then after hour, of course, when the management office was closed. And during that time, the internet was just kind of starting to come to play. Believe it or not, it's been a little while ago. So, man, I'll tell you, that cost, if I remember correctly, we were paying anywhere between $15,000 and $20,000 a month. And that wasn't something we were throwing on our proposal, right, for the additional cost. We tried to add to it, to the guard rate to cover it, but it was a big cost.
Wow, I didn't realize that it would have been that much. So you had several people at a time, or just one person at a time?
We had probably 2 or 3, sometimes up to 4 people. So we really had to. That's part of the reasons why we developed the software that we did, because we had to track the calls and what kind of calls we were taking. And then when I tried to go out to the clients and say, hey, listen, we're really helping you guys streamline your own office. We're reducing those calls for you. They didn't question that. They knew we were doing the work. But, when it came down to trying to figure out what they were going to pay for that, we had to spend almost 6 months tracking every call that came in, whether it was a maintenance after-hour emergency, was it was a permit order or a security function. We tracked it. And once we tracked it, not only did we scare ourselves, the client itself actually realized how much time we were saving them, and we finally got some money for it. But it's a big cost, and you really have to stay on top. So I was looking for any possible way that I could reduce that cost. So we actually started to think about overseas at the time.
Okay, so let's dive into a couple of reasons why outsourcing, reasons that we may consider outsourcing. First of all, like you said, offshore agents demand a lot lower salaries and often have a little bit more of a technical expertise. They can operate with the software, pick that up pretty easily. And so that would be one benefit, certainly, for outsourcing is a cost standpoint. Do you know what you saved when you outsourced, Chris?
It was half the cost.
Wow.
Now, take in mind, everybody across seas knew the expense in the U.S., and that was a big cost. So they were very good at trying to put those centers together. And it's when they talk about technical expertise, that's exactly what they're referring to. These guys tried to actually put these call centers to help people from the U.S. because it was such a huge cost. And they're living in California at the same time. We've got, workers' comp, and it's just exhausting as far as the cost, John.
Yeah. Now, one reason to outsource, especially if you're a smaller company, is that it really gives your customers the impression that they're receiving support around the clock. And in the security industry, that's critical, right, Chris? You can't have the phones going to a voicemail. You can't risk a busy tone, especially in an industry that's very time sensitive at certain times for certain incidents.
Yeah, well, here's where I was at. If I was going to outsource this, I wanted let me put it this way. I did not want our phone to ring any more than 3 times. That was the demand in the office, right? So if the phone rings, somebody better be picking it up on the 3rd ring. And I don't care if a dispatcher couldn't get there, a manager would pick it up, right? So we wanted that positive. How frustrating is it for anybody to call and get a voicemail, right? And or the phone never answers. And then number 3, you go right into a message machine that's going to direct you to 15 different extensions. Very frustrating when the need is there.
Yeah, and then you also talk about a benefit of outsourcing is that when there are high volume calls coming in during like specific times, like peak hours, especially Friday night between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m., you're going to have a much higher volume phone calls. And so when you outsource this, you're not limited to just a set number of employees. A lot of times they have several agents on site. You're not their only customer. And so you're always going to make sure that that phone call is being answered and handled accordingly. Another benefit that we can talk about is that it makes sure that the issues are being resolved in a timely manner. We aren't relying on a voicemail. We can set up some standard operating procedures for which supervisors need to be contacted. Do we need to contact the customer? Do we need to contact the security operator, the owner of the company? So you're taking this because the call is always being answered and you have a set procedure set up. You're making sure that every call is handled with customer service being a priority, right?
Yeah, and then when you can't outsource, you can take the people that were providing or doing that service for you. They can do their own job duties, right? Made them more productive. So a lot of advantages.
And you're talking about people who are specialized in what they're doing. They're specialized in taking phone calls, right? Like you're not talking about someone who's still trying to learn and get the handle of it. They're going to be very good at data entry. You're not going to hear them like fumbling around in the background to try and take the information down. They're going to be very efficient. The notes should be really dialed in. Of course, this is in reference to, obviously we have to hire a quality company. You shouldn't, you're going to want to do your research and make sure you're hiring a quality call center, but when you have selected that company, they should have very, very efficient processes in place to make sure they can handle an extremely high volume and also get you that information or your customer the information as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and I liked it too, John, because they cared. I hate to put it this way. My call center was out of India at the time, and $7 an hour to them was a lot of money. Mm-hmm. All right, so they had people that were excited about working and making that dollar versus my problem here in California paying these guys is, I think it was probably 12 or 13 an hour, right? So I'm double with all the other, things that go on top of that as far as employee, workers' comp and all that stuff. And, and I still having a turnover because it was pretty frustrating on the call. I'd sit there all day and take those calls. So I had a high turnover and a lot of costs when I could go to a place that was excited about taking those calls. So that was very encouraging. I really liked that part, that they just loved their job and they were willing to do the work, and I didn't have that burden.
One benefit we may have a tendency to overlook is that you only have to train a call center once. You're not dependent on their turnover, right? So you're going to train like an account manager. You're going to go through, they're going to establish processes for every type of phone call. You can potentially set up scripts for every type of phone call. You can really get dialed in the process, but once that's set up, you're not dependent on their turnover. Whereas when you have it internally, you fire a guard, you've got that training time. You're gonna want to have them shadow someone. You're gonna want to make sure that there's certainly an onboarding process, and that's costs that you have to front. That when you outsource this, you don't have to worry about that. You're gonna make sure that there's a set standard, there's quality assurance systems in place, and you're always gonna get top-notch customer service for your customers.
Yeah, and I like the fact they already had their protocol, they already had their Kickstart documents ready, right? So they knew what they needed from you. They came in real quick, just filled out the information they needed to do, and we were able to put it together, pretty fast. So it was nice to be able. That's one of the nice parts about outsourcing too. A company that was already familiar with the process.
Well, Silver Track Nation, there are obviously some downsides to outsourcing as well, and we're going to talk about that right after we hear from our amazing sponsors over at Paperless Proposal. Stay tuned. After the break, we'll jump right back into our featured conversation.
Developed for mid to large security companies, Paperless Proposal is the #1 enterprise-level cloud-based proposal creation and management solution. Use it to create, send, track, and manage highly customized proactive or RFP proposals. Differentiate your company and win more business with this powerful proposal generation software that can include office files, video, templates, pricing tools, CRM integration, and e-signature approval. Contact us for a free demo at www.paperlessproposal.com/Silvertrack.
Now, Chris, obviously it's not all sunshine and roses. When we're outsourcing, there can be some headaches that pop up.
Yeah, there was a few.
So take us through that. What were some of the concerns that you had when you did outsource, and what were some of the unexpected things that popped up as you were going through this process?
Well, here's, I got to be careful how I say this, of course, but the big problem was when you're calling India, it was the language barrier, right? It was the terminology, right? So you had to make sure when somebody was calling that number that they could speak really good English, right? And then the accent itself, if it was too hard or people didn't understand, right? They got frustrated and they say, "Where am I calling from? Give me somebody from the U.S." They knew right away where they were calling, right?
Yeah.
So when you're calling your call center, you got to make sure that, they've got some people that understand the language and terminology. It's a hut for a house over there. It's an apartment over here. So when a caller was saying, "Hey, I have a problem at my apartment," and then somebody's going, "Apartment? I'm sorry, I don't understand you."
Yeah.
It didn't go over very well. So those are some of the things, just one of the things we had major issues with.
I think now things are progressing and they're evolving a little bit more. That isn't so much of an issue. Of course, it still is, but the American culture is very sensitive to that now because there was such a big rush, in the early 2000s to outsource because companies could cut costs so much. But when you start to see customer service ratings go way down, there's a reaction to that, right? And so there's a lot of call centers that are addressing that. But of course, you have to consider the culture, where you're hiring this out. So that's certainly something that needs to go into the decision process: is where is this call center located? What time of day is it going to be there? Do they understand the culture of the area in which they're going to be receiving the phone calls?
Yeah, it's come a long way since then, John. I have to admit, it really has.
So one concern that you may have as well is you don't necessarily have as much control on the customer experience, right? Like you can't place a demand like only 3 phone calls. You won't be there a lot of times, and you'll never be there in the office with them. And you'll have to rely on sort of some call recordings. There's just a lot that could slip through the cracks if you're not really super stringent on it. So just a lack of control over the customer experience could be a concern over outsourcing as well.
Yeah, what we did is that I actually Skype was available at the time, but just came out. So we use that to monitor and take the phone calls with their teams in India to see how they were doing. That way we could sit on the background, they could mute the client, then we could actually talk to them. Right? No, this is what you want to say to the client. So we were actually there providing that kind of training all the way from the U.S. in the beginning. So there's a lot of cool things you can do to get through that.
Yeah, one of the trade-offs that we have of always having someone available to answer the calls is that there could be a lack of consistency, especially if they are handling a number of different clients. This particular agent could be answering the phone for an appointment setting for a salon, one phone call, and then up pops the security phone call. And so you've got to, weigh out how they handle consistency. How do these companies address it? And so one thing that we may run into when we're outsourcing is just a lack of consistency when you're dealing with a call center.
Yeah, and I would recommend, if you're considering it, you don't want to dump all your clients onto that call center at one time. You may want to take just a couple clients, get it kick-started, see how they're doing with that group. If you're interested in having another call center work with you, maybe have them take on a couple different clients. So, get a good start, get a good foundation before you release your entire operation over to one center with one number. Something to think about.
Great point, Chris. Great point. Last, I think one of the concerns for outsourcing is that you're really limited in what you can actually have them do. So you talk about a huge cost savings, but I think, Chris, probably what you ran into, and maybe not in your case, but a lot of times when you're just making the transition from bringing this from the supervisors in the field, bringing it in-house, there isn't full-time answering service needed. And so you can roll in other jobs with that, whether they're monitoring CCTV accounts or they're jumping in on some of the scheduling or whatever it may be. There's a lot of different possibilities, but you really don't have that option when you're hiring this out. And so unless you're positive that you have the need and that there is enough to warrant a call service only answering your phone calls, you may want to do sort of a hybrid, bring someone into the office and see how that works, especially bringing someone in-house, because you have a little bit more control, you get a little bit better idea of what they're going to be doing, and then that gives you a good idea as far as what you want to outsource and how you want it to work when you're hiring another company.
Yeah, I'm going to go back again, John. It's all a numbers game. So you're going to have to really do your own numbers and track all your problems and have that in front of you before you reach out, because it's going to give you a good idea where you need people.
Well, guys, this is part 2 of a 4-part series on running your security dispatch center, where on episode number 42, we talked about just the how to decide whether or not to begin outsourcing or to bring it in-house. When is it really time to start looking into that? What are some of the things to concern? So if you haven't heard that episode, be sure to go back to check that out. And then on the show notes section of this episode, you can download the ultimate guide to running your security dispatch center, which is a full ebook on everything we've discussed here, but then also details on how to outsource this. We go much further detail on some things to consider. We also go into much more detail on how to launch an in-house team if you want to do that. Everything from sample job descriptions, checklists, everything you could need to launch your in-house or outsourced call center. So be sure to visit that. That's at silvertracksoftware.com/43 for episode 43. And until next time, I'm Johnny Page.
I'm Chris Anderson.
This was the SilverTrack Extra, and we'll talk to you soon.
This has been another episode of the SilverTrack Extra. For more insider information, visit silvertracksoftware.com/extra. Listen on the go by subscribing in iTunes. Want to hear your questions answered on the show? Visit silvertracksoftware.com/questions to submit your requests.